All right, we're going to look at Battle of the Bulge maps. The Battle of the Bulge is, in terms of the wargaming hobby, pretty much unavoidable. World War II is the most covered topic in the entire wargaming hobby. And of the battles of World War II, you've got East Front and Battle of the Bulge are the two main areas of that conflict that are covered. It's probably pretty close between East Front and Battle of the Bulge, of which is more covered. I would tend to think that Bulge games might be more prolific than East Front games, but I don't know. Maybe too close to call. But you can't wargame World War II without coming across an ungodly amount of Bulge games. I'm not a particular Battle of the Bulge enthusiast. I'm not particularly a World War II enthusiast, although I enjoy World War II wargaming, and it is entirely unavoidable if you're in the wargaming hobby. Even if you're not interested in World War II at all, you probably have at least a handful of World War II games. And of those handful that you have, at least one is probably going to be a game focusing on the Battle of the Bulge. Again, it's just, if you're into this hobby at all, and even if you're not as into it as I am, you're going to be, again, I'm not a big World War II enthusiast, but, probably 50% of the games on these shelves are World War II related. That's just the nature of the beast. I don't know, 50% may be high. Again, I don't really focus on it, but I thought, well, let me see how many Battle of the Bulge games I have, and take a look at what the maps are like, because it's that time of year. It's December. It's historically when the Battle of the Bulge was fought. So I pulled all the Bulge games I had off my shelves, and I had more than I thought. I was thinking I had maybe just a few, and I have more like a half dozen. I think it's 7. I got to pull this one off the shelf too, which I just got recently. This is the Race for Bastogne from GTS. So that is, what I've got, 3 on the table over there, plus Race for Bastogne, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 Bulge games for somebody who doesn't really care about the Battle of the Bulge all that much. Again, it's going to be unavoidable. So I've sort of grouped these into, there's gamers ones over there with Last Blitzkrieg and Ardennes 2, plus the old Avalon Hill Battle of the Bulge. Over here on this table, I placed, we've got Time for Trumpets, Ardennes 44, and Bitter Woods. All these, as it turns out, are Mark Simonich designed, or at least mostly or partially Mark Simonich designed maps. I think on A Time for Trumpets, which is laying here on the top, I think Joe Youst has a credit in there as well on the map design. But Simonich maps are very similar, or they're very identifiable in a lot of respects. He has, I really tend to really like his map artwork. It is very clean. It is very crisp, precise. There's no murky colors or overdoing it on textures and so forth. So when it comes to the Battle of the Bulge, I think everybody thinks snow. It was fought in one of the coldest winters in recent European history at the time. There was snow on the ground, so usually if you talk about the Battle of the Bulge, the first thing that people think of is snow. Tanks and American GIs trudging through snow, fighting in snow. Snowy trees exploding with mortar fire, the siege of Bastogne in the snow. It's all about snow. Christmas time, it's, people think of snow. So, do most Battle of the Bulge game maps incorporate snow. And what I learned after laying all these maps out is some do and some don't. And then some do a little bit and others do a lot. You can look here and see lots of white on the map here. And, if you see white on a map, if you're thinking about old SPI maps, probably that would just be clear terrain, just normal clear terrain on old Redmond Simonson designed SPI maps. A white or cream colored space is clear, just clear terrain. Whereas here, I think usually white is going to refer to clear terrain, but also snow, because it's the clear terrain where you can see the snow. So here you can see a lot more white up there in that quadrant of the map. And again, this is the Time for Trumpets map, and it is the weirdest 5-map layout I've ever seen, because looking at this, over here, like you've got, and I'll get to these in a minute, but this is a 4-map gamers game there, last Blitzkrieg, and this is a 5-map GMT map here, and the 5-map and the 4-map look about the same. They seem to take up about the same amount of space, but this one has 5 maps on it, and that's because the southern portion of the maps are laid lengthwise against 2 sorry, adjusting this here. The 3 southern portion maps, you can see kind of where they join together there, are laid lengthwise against 2 maps running lengthwise across the top. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, the question is, did they really need to do it that way? Because it doesn't seem... So my guess is they probably did it this way because there's more 1 map or less than all 5 map scenarios, and this would be a way to put together more multi-map scenarios. It allows a little more configurability at the expense of having an additional map, whereas ordinarily you might be able to get this with 1, 2, 3, 4 maps laid lengthwise, which is how most 4-map games do things. But here you've got a 5-map arrangement. But again, this is classic Simonich map design. And there are a lot of textures on here, so maybe that's Joe Youst's influence on the map. I'm not positive, but this is very bound to the hex grid. You can see the terrain ends clearly at the hexes. In some cases, like with some of the darker trees and stuff, there's a little, it's a little more nebulous around things like that, around the hex. But, like this kind of, zoom back out here. The kind of, this kind of coverage is very hex grid based, whereas, some of the trees and some of this brown stuff aren't so strictly hex defined like these are. So it's kind of a mix of both. So you get some snow on here. Again, lots of green for the trees. The Ardennes, obviously, was a very difficult terrain. Lots of different elevations, lots of forest. I mean, it's the Ardennes forest. So, the roads aren't great. But this does have, what are you looking for on a typical Bulge map? Obviously, there's Bastogne, which is going to be, close to where the Germans launch. And this is probably here is going to be the Our River? Nope. Somewhere here. Maybe it's not on this map. No, there it is. Okay. So there's the Our River, which is going to be where the Germans launch their assault across the Our River. So most Bulge maps, if they do the entire battle, are going to have the launch point of the Our River where the Germans launch their assault across, and generally it's going to be trying to reach, should be the Meuse River here. So that was their Their target was to cross the Meuse. There's Namur up there, and then drive their way towards Antwerp. Obviously, I think scattered units made it to the Meuse, but not across it, and that was the extent of the Bulge. So it's usually going to cover that space. And I'm a little less, again, not a huge Battle of the Bulge enthusiast, so I don't exactly remember what the common landmarks. I knew the east and west landmarks being the Our River and the Meuse. I don't remember exactly what your sort of north and south boundaries are. I know, at least on what I'm doing right now in the race for Bastogne, is related to fighting around Wiltz, which was along the southern front of the Bulge. So Wiltz would be somewhere along the south end of the map, south of Bastogne. And I don't know if it actually shows up on this map or not. I'm not seeing it just at a glance, because it's going to be a small little village. But anyway, that's a typical southern advance a southern boundary marker for the Battle of the Bulge. The northern boundaries, again, I'm not super clear on this map. It is Liège up there at the very top part of the map. But again, so this is clean. It is what you would expect to see on a Bulge map, which is brown, green, and white with the blue of the rivers. That's going to be a frequent theme. Just looking at the camera, like it's coming across as darker on camera than it actually is looking at it for real. And the camera lighting like shifts when I switch from 1x zoom to out less than 1x zoom. But it's a little bit lighter in person. So the greens look a little darker on here on the camera than they do in person. So this is, again, what you're typically going to see on a Bulge map is just going to be lots of green, lots of brown, lots of white. And some will have that in varying levels or layers more so than others. So let's go ahead and pull these out of the way so that we can get to the other Mark Simonich maps underneath. So that was Time for Trumpets. Again, a weird 5-map configuration. Time for Trumpets is a massive and, from what I can tell, pretty complicated game that I haven't tried to play yet, but would like to, just because I like the personal challenge of taking on heavy monsters, and that would be a big one. Right up there with like last Blitzkrieg. So just trying to arrange these 2-mappers. So these are a couple of 2-mappers here. This is Ardennes 44. This is a Mark Simonich design for which he also did the map. And so you can see fairly similar in terms of color palette to what we were looking at. Not as much white on this one in here, though the white is more on the north, because if I'm looking at this correctly, this should be, again, a west, east, north, and south, like most of the Bulge map orientations are going to be. So there, Liège is, so maybe not, maybe this is different. Where's my compass rose on here? Because if Liège is on the right side of the map, that tells me that north is this way, which is definitely a interesting arrangement. But yeah, I think that's what we're looking at, is a differently arranged map here. Obviously, I've not played. Yep, you can see the compass rose has north on the right side. So that explains why Liège is where it is. And it also makes sense because the Bulge is a larger horizontal. If you're looking at north being at the top of the map, it's always going to be longer horizontally than it is vertically. And while all the typeface and stuff on here is arranged vertically, the battle itself is going, so you're looking east that way. So, or I'm sorry, west that way, east this way. I'm confusing myself at this point. So here, in this case, you're going to have the Our River along this part of the map, where, you know, across which the Germans launched their attack. And you're going to have Bastogne here, and then the Meuse is going to be along that end of the map as your goal as the Germans. So again, more classic Simonich style art here. That's his trees and the other green stuff, the non-clear. I guess there's heavy woods and light woods maybe, or rough, whatever the light green stuff might be. I'm not sure if there's an actual terrain key on the map. There's lots of symbols and stuff on the map. I do like the maps. Again, Simonich does very good functional and yet aesthetically pleasing counter art, map art, and so forth. He's probably one of the more prolific wargame map artists working today. And his stuff is always highly functional and highly pleasing to look at. With the apex of his map design, in my opinion, being his work on the Ancient World series maps of Carthage and Rise of the Roman Republic, and hopefully the forthcoming Thunderbolt. All those maps should look very similar, but they are, I think, the height of his elegant, clean, functional design work. So this one, a little bit darker palette overall than the Time for Trumpets. I think like some thicker lines, a little heavier texturing and so forth on here. But again, all of the hallmarks of typical Bulge map design, which is going to be your snowy terrain combined with the sort of dark green pine forest. So that is Ardennes 44. Over here, then, we have Bitter Woods. So I had the boxes sitting out for these, but there's Ardennes 44 with your classic Roger McGowan artwork on the cover. And then Bitter Woods here. This was a Compass title. And the designer on this one, this is not Simonich, it is Randy Heller that did this. But the graphics are Simonich. So this one, a little closer in color palette, somewhere between A Time for Trumpets and Ardennes 44 in terms of color palette. Not quite as light as A Time for Trumpets, not nearly as dark as Ardennes 44, but again, the tree graphics and stuff, very similar. The main difference being in the brown, whatever the brown graphics are there, which I'm assuming is like rough terrain. But again, similar in terms of color palette. Just a sort of a medium between the two. This has, of course, Bitterwoods has a little different graphic design around the borders, with the black bordering around it. And here, this one, same way, same orientation. Again, it's two maps with east to west, but here the typeface and stuff is arranged with it horizontally as opposed to vertically the way it was on the Ardennes 44 map. But again, very similar, and you've got that more open terrain here in the northwest part near the Meuse, and the heavier terrain near the Our River and in the south and southeast where the attack was launched by the Germans. And here you've got German setup and, you know, like various unit locations and stuff on the map, marked on the map, which, you know, there's two schools of thought on that. You can clutter up the map and cause a little bit of confusion if you're not used to it. But for people that don't like having to set up on a bunch of org charts or whatever, it is nice to have it on the map, just to be able to do it there instead of setting it up on the org chart and then having to set it up on the map and combining those two. So again, more classic Simonich art. This is a little more rudimentary than the other two designs. The other two designs, I think, well, I don't know, Ardennes 44 might not be more recent than Bitterwoods. But I know the Compass Games version of Bitterwoods is a later version of the design, so maybe this is the old map. I don't know. But this one looks a little chunkier, a little less clean, maybe a little more rudimentary than I think some of the more elegant graphics that appear on the Ardennes 44 map, as well as the Time for Trumpets map, which I think is the most recent of these three. So anyway, that's a look at all the Simonich maps. Again, the color palettes are all the same: brown, green, white. Those are your choices when it comes to Bulge games. Except if you go over here, this is the GTS map for Race for Bastogne from MMP, and this is a little narrower front. It's not the entire front of the battle, but it is end-to-end maps going this way. There's Bastogne. So you've got, again, the Our River over here, and this doesn't even get to the Meuse. So this is really just focusing on Bastogne. So it's a little slice of the front, but you can see the white covering here, much more white, very little brown, and then a mix of sort of a green color there for the forested areas. So this is a different scale than the others. So, you know, hence it's going to look a little bit different. The texture and stuff is obviously quite a bit different than the Simonich maps have. So the overall effect, though, much more white on here. The focus being a lot more on snow and the woods with just periodic roads and so forth breaking up the, and here you've got like your dotted lines for minor roads, and your solid lines for your major roads, and there's, you know, your slopes and so forth, but largely a lot more white on here for the snow, and then your city graphics and so forth are on there. So the overall effect is fairly pleasing. Again, this is coming out a little darker on the camera than it is on the table under the lights. So, but overall typical white and green coloring for Bulge games, but much more natural looking terrain on here. Not, as you can see, not nearly as heavily focused or tied to the hex grid the way the others are. So here, yeah, you can see when I do this zoom, it like shifts the color. I'll be curious to see how that actually shows up on YouTube when I shift like farther than a 1x zoom away. But anyway, that is a look at the Race for Bastogne map. A much different experience graphically than what you can see for the Simonich maps. So over here, then we've got the Gamers, the two Gamers games that I have on Bulge. I think Gamers has made some other games as well. You can see not nearly as much white on here. This is all green, shades of green and shades of brown. No snow actually appears on here anywhere that I can see. It's all just shades of green, so might as well not be winter snow at all. So this is the last Blitzkrieg, which is their Battalion Combat Series Bulge game. This is a 4-mapper, and this is classic Gamers style. You got a very prominent hex grid on there with the white outlined hexes, but the terrain itself is not heavily tied to the hex grid. It's not, so you don't get the hex-shaped terrain. It's like Dean Essig, towards the later part of his career, and he is sadly no longer with us, but towards the later part of his career, he focused on disconnecting his terrain elements from the hex grid so that you didn't get hex-shaped terrain features. Basically, he would just do the terrain and then lay the hex grid over the top of it, and sort of edges of terrain be damned. He did this in his Civil War games as well. So yeah, here's a look at the last Blitzkrieg, and this is a much darker overall palette, but a much wider variety of terrain and interlacing of terrain types with each other compared to the Simonich maps, and a little closer in look and style to the Race for Bastogne in terms of not being heavily bound to the hex grid. So it also has the terrain key on the map, which is nice. And again, this is a north, south, west, east layout. So, and somewhere here, I think this is the Our River here, where the attack starts, and then Bastogne right here. Always looking for that on your Bulge maps to sort of orient where the German attack goes, and then the Meuse is over here. You can see a much wider river than some of the other river terrain that appears on there. And you've got Belgium and Germany clearly marked on the map, Luxembourg. So you've got your country names in white and your place names in black. So it is, much darker, much more green and brown, and not emphasizing the snow at all. If you were looking at this, it could look just like any other West Front tactical map. So that is the 4 maps of the last Blitzkrieg. And again, these have, so Gamers has a lot of, it's definitely, I would say, cruder looking than the Simonich maps. Not nearly, and all of the fonts and stuff are the same. There's a certain rudimentary aspect and samey, like the Gamers World War II maps look just the same as their Civil War maps in terms of fonts and generally iconography and stuff like that. So you don't get a lot of what I would say is like period immersion or whatever in Gamers maps, but they are highly functional and very easy to use for wargaming purposes in terms of identifying your different aspects of your terrain. So the other map here then is the Ardennes 2 map, and I just got this recently. This is a recent pickup in the MMP winter sale that they just ran. And here, this is a different scale, so it's only 2 maps. A bit darker, not as many light browns. This is more just dark green, light green, dark brown. And again, no white, but not, I don't know, this is sort of a putty color almost that the open terrain is. So this would be your white terrain on other maps. But the same kind of design here, in that the terrain is not heavily hexed as the case may be in this. It is, again, terrain that's not heavily tied to the hex grid. So again, you've got your Meuse River over here, and there's Bastogne, and the Our River over there in Germany. So again, typical Bulge front that you're covering, and again, very similar. It's the exact same fonts and things as the last Blitzkrieg map, and then the graphics themselves also very similar, just the colors largely different, and again, some differences. I'm looking to see if railroads are covered on here the way they appeared to be on the other map. Different iconography, I guess, for the railroads. That's not showing up immediately here, but regardless, similar look here. for this in terms of how the terrain is arranged. Just the colors and things are a little bit different. So that was Ardennes, the Ardennes 2 map, also from the Gamers MMP. And over here then, to finish things off, we've got the classic Avalon Hill Battle of the Bulge from, I don't know when this first came out, maybe the 70s. This was maybe a reprint. Yeah, this was a reprint from 80, or maybe the original came out in 81. I remember. I'm thinking, yeah, maybe that is the original, 1981. But as was the case with Avalon Hill, it's mounted. So you've got the map pasted onto a mounted board. And this one looks like it's arranged like here. You've got that typeface going that way, but then you've got probably the Allies sitting on this side because you've got Belgium and Luxembourg and various other map elements sort of oriented like for somebody sitting this way. But then you can see Germany's facing the other way, so the German player may be sitting on that side of the map. Again, here's the Our, is this the Our River? Hey, there's Wiltz. I was talking about Wiltz earlier, being sort of the southern end. And in this case, that would be like, this is to be the southern end of the map here. This would be towards the east into Germany. But this one, more white space than any of the other maps. And by comparison, like very little actual like dark green woods terrain, especially over here. Like there's more over here, not much over here. This seems to look more like mountainous type terrain or hilly terrain here. So a much lighter colored map than the others, obviously at a different scale because it's much smaller than the others, but you've got your again, brown, green, white, your primary bulge colors, and again, functional, easy to see roads, easy to see distinction between clear terrain and rough terrain or mountainous terrain and woods terrain. Your city hexes clearly, or your town or village hexes all clearly identified. Not sure what the red dashed lines are here. Are those maybe country borders? Because that's Belgium. But France, there's the Meuse, so we're in France. Over here, no, because there's France. So the heavy black line must be the borders there. So not sure what the red dashed lines are. I haven't played this either. So, but this is classic early Avalon Hill 80s map graphics. Nothing too fancy. Still pretty heavily tied to the hex grid, unlike your Gamers games over there. So again, more classic Bulge colors. So again, most of these tend to confirm the Bulge graphic types, which usually incorporate snow in one fashion or another. Only the Gamers seems to eschew illustrating snow on their map. I tend to prefer snow on my Battle of the Bulge maps because that's how you know you're playing a Bulge game, right? You're playing it. This one's in the snow, so I want to see the snow in there. That means it's a Bulge game. Not having snow is, to me, I don't know, takes something out of it. You don't really need the snow, obviously, on a map. You're only really concerned about the snow itself is not usually part of the terrain effects, right? So it's just the roads and the mountains and the trees are the terrain effects that you're looking for. So, or that have an impact on the game. The snow itself rarely, if ever, does in a Bulge game. At least none that I've played have actually had the snow as part of the, any terrain impact. Usually it's a weather impact and not a terrain impact. So yeah, you don't need the snow on the map, but I kind of like the snow on the map. That's what makes it a Bulge game. So anyway, that was a look at the maps of all the Bulge games that I have. There are many more Bulge games out there that I do not have, and probably will never have, because again, I'm not the hugest Battle of the Bulge enthusiast, but these are the ones that I have, and I'm actually playing Race for Bastogne right now and learning the GTS system. So far, I am am enjoying it. So looking forward to exploring more of that particular game. And then I would really like to try A Time for Trumpets. I do love challenging myself with monster games. And if I'm on a bit of a Battle of the Bulge roll, why not give it a try?